so I won't go too long in the introduction, but just to let you all know, one of the recommended action items in the comprehensive plan, as well as the downtown action plan, was the development of a return on infrastructure investment tool. And so today we have with us Chuck Marone, Joe Minicozy, and Josh McCarty. There's Josh. And to present the first kind of draft findings of their results. So what we're basically looking at is understanding our capital expenses and understanding the revenue that they bring back into the government so that we can make sure that we make decisions for the long term that are financially sustainable. So what you guys are going to see and what we've been doing primarily internally with staff over the last day, and what we'll do tomorrow with a couple of other groups, is just kind of talk through the beginnings and the basics of the model, what they've uncovered so far, and then what happens next. So I'm going to turn it over to Chuck.
Great, thank you.
To take over.
Thank you. I don't know how many of you saw me speak a year ago. Yeah, absolutely. One of the we've done modeling like this. We're going to show you a bunch of maps, a bunch of data, a bunch of information. We've done modeling like this around the country in different ways, but nothing as comprehensive and thorough as this. A lot of the stuff that I've done has been on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis or development by development basis. These guys have looked countywide at revenue streams, but putting the revenue and the expenses together is the goal here, and is something that we want to do on an ongoing basis. But I have to tell you that we kind of have an inkling of what was going to happen, because the whole is the sum of the parts, right? We've evaluated the parts in many places. But even having done that, a lot of these findings, I won't say shock us or surprise us, but they jump out at us in many ways. And I'm going to give you one number to kind of provide some context to this, and then I'm going to turn over to Joe to kind of walk you through some of the maps and the data. As we're looking at city, the median house price in your city is $150,000. Half of the houses are priced more than that, half the houses less than that. That's a, relatively average. It's the median, it's not the average, but this is the median house. If you examine that house, on an annual basis, they'll pay about $1,500 in taxes to the city, and of that, roughly 150, slightly less, will go to maintaining stuff, streets, sidewalks, drainage systems, that kind of thing. So if you're the typical family living in the typical house, that's what you'll pay. When we sat down and started looking at this, we got really good data on the roads and the ditches and the sidewalks. We kind of have a good understanding. We've got a bunch of bid tabs, we have a bunch of information. We know where all the roads are, we know their width and the area, we've got a ton of information. And what we were able to discern from that is that in order to maintain the stuff that we have already built, this is not building more, this is not adding capacity, this is not expanding, just to maintain what's already on the system, over the next 50 years. So we've amortized this, we made some assumptions that this stuff would last a long time, which is not always the case, but we're trying to be conservative. We would be talking about that family living in that $150,000 house needing to pay an additional $3,300 a year in taxes to the local government just for road maintenance. When we started looking at the underground stuff, the sewer and the water, that number jumps quite a bit. We project an additional roughly $4,000 for that infrastructure. When you consider that the median household income of a family in Lafayette is $41,000, the idea that 20% of that would go towards just maintaining local infrastructure is kind of an absurd number. Yet, that's the numbers that we're looking at just to maintain what's already been built. One of the things that I stress all the time in my talks is the trade-off that we have made over the last 50, 60 years in how we've built our cities. If we go back 100, 200 years ago, and we look at cities, they were pretty much on their own. If if this city was going to be successful, it was not going to be successful because of something given to them by the state or given to them by the federal government. It was going to be successful on its own. And that was true of every city in the country. And while that made it so cities were kind of rough places sometimes, they didn't grow real well, there were a lot of structural problems with them. At the end of the day, it ensured that their budgets were always going to be sound, because if they weren't, they would simply cease to exist. As we became a flatter world, you can start with the telegraph, you can go to the railroad, you can look at technologies that connected us more. One of the things that those technologies did is they slowly kind of nationalized our country. There's many upsides. One of the downsides of that is that our local policies here have become more reflective of a national growth agenda than a local growth agenda. And a lot of what we do here for growth and development following this national model is to undertake projects that have immediate returns in terms of GDP growth, in terms of employment, but often have very negative returns on our own balance sheet. Developer comes in, builds a development, puts in the sewer, the water, the roads, the streets, the sidewalks, all that stuff. From a macroeconomy standpoint, that's great. We're creating jobs, we're creating GDP growth, materials being bought, all this stuff going on. From a city standpoint, it's great because we get a new development and we get all this new tax revenue for that development, and it doesn't cost us anything. But when we look at it over the long term, we as a local government now assume, as part of that transaction, the liability to fix and maintain and service all this stuff. And when we start to think about how Lafayette grew from being this very small city on the high ground in the middle of a swamp to this really large city that now encompasses all of that area that before was never even considered developable, because we never could have built the ditches and maintained the coulees and run the pipe and done all the stuff out in this undevelopable land. We have taken on an enormous amount of liability. What we're going to kind of kick off today with this conversation is how do we, first of all, start to take stock of that and assess it. Get our minds around that $3,300 a year additional just to maintain the roads. How do we use the data that we have as a city to start making more strategic decisions about what our investment should be? And how do we, in a very broad sense, engage the public? Because these are going to be difficult issues to deal with. How do we have a broad community conversation to make some of those decisions? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe. Joe Minicozy and Josh have done a lot of the core modeling, and Joe is going to go through and give you some of the background in terms of why we did what we did and what some of the implications are. So go ahead.
So hopefully you can see what the problem is. We're essentially in an upside-down financial situation. But how did we get here and how do we talk about it? A lot of our work is getting into the data, seeing what that presents to us as far as what's going on economically, both positive and negative. So we're going to peel away some of that, and I want to put forward the question: what is a city anyway? What are they? Is an object. The way that we see them is a really large real estate development project that is, in essence, this is Asheville, North Carolina, but it's a finite boundary of land that has to operate financially. So for us, it's just a pile of acres. There's a limit to it. My city isn't allowed to annex. My county cannot annex. So what we have to play with are those acres inside that. The acres can reveal how they're efficient. So getting back to what it means to be a city, this is the word incorporate from Oxford Dictionary. It says right here, constitute a company, a city, or other organization as a legal corporation. So the city is indeed a corporation. It's a business in a way. We elect our board of directors. It has to be managed. My city of Asheville is worth $12.8 billion is a real estate development project. If we were to go out and build that, it would probably be double that because we'd have to pay for the roads and everything else, right? So this whole process has been balancing this out, understanding the revenues, understanding the costs. First, we're going to run through the revenue side. How do you measure this? How do you understand where revenue comes from? When you have all these different units of land, when you have all these different parcels of land, how do you make them relative? For us, our parent company is a real estate developer. We look at our parcels of land inside our downtown and how they function. So farmers already do this. Farmers have finite acres of land. They look at the acre's productivity, the fertilizer per acre, the yield per acre. So this is one of our buildings. We rehab this, ground story retail, second floor office, residential above. The city did the streetscape project. We took it from $300,000 of value to $11 million of value. So that's an incredibly big punch to our community as far as return to the community in taxes. This thing now pays 3,500% more taxes than it did when we first bought it. So do y'all have a 401k plan that grows by 3,500%? Or a CD or a bond or some savings account? Think about the potency of that. That's not our money. That's money that this building is now contributing to the community for 3,500% more stuff. More greenways, bike lanes, we don't care. It's for our community. So people say to me, like, well, Joe, that's fine. We have that $11 million. Over here, we have this Walmart at $20 million. That's potent. 2 times the value of our building. Well, what's not fair is that it sits on 34 acres. So it indeed pays $221,000 in property taxes. Anybody in this room pay $221,000 in property taxes for one building? It's an incredible production. Well, this is my house. Those are my dogs. My dogs think they're lions. We're on a 1/10 of an acre of land. If there was a 1 acre cookie cutter that fell from space and landed in my neighborhood, it hit 10 houses, right? Follow me? Each paying $2,000 or $20,000 an acre of productivity, of tax production in my neighborhood. You take that same 1 acre cookie cutter, fly it in space, and drop it down on the Walmart, it's really only paying $6,500 an acre in taxes. Now what if you had an acre of this building here? So what we try to show our elected officials is there's potency that comes from the different architectural typologies. That our building produces $634,000 an acre in taxes. I was presenting this in Denver, Colorado, and I wanted to make the point easy for them. I'm like, look, y'all are in Denver. If you had an acre of land to grow something in Denver, what are you going to grow? Wheat, soybeans, and marijuana. You know? Just made it pretty clear for them that it's a cash crop. Anyway, this joke works in Asheville too, but you're probably saying, you know, Joe, that's not fair. There's retail taxes. We do it for retail, so let's go ahead and get rid of me and just let's run the numbers. This is the Walmart's annual sales, about $77 million. Now the misnomer is that's not what you get, that's what you pay. What you get is a portion of that. So it's 8 cents on the sales tax dollar, 27% of that returns to the city. We're about $47,000 in retail taxes. To put it retail plus property tax, we're looking at $51,000 of total tax revenue to my community per acre from that Walmart. This is just our our property taxes per acre of our building. You add the retail taxes, you're cooking with gas, jobs per acre. I mean, how do you want to look at this? When you stack the numbers side by side and you make things relative in an apples to apples way, you really start to see the potency of this building versus that building. We even have residential per acre, they have 0. So again, a lot of this is just stepping out, being agnostic about the information and looking at the data in a comparative way so that you can see where the productivity is. This isn't scary math that I'm doing here. This is pretty simple stuff. It's just dividing the revenue into with a footprint that it sits on. It's 5th grade division, basically. So we already do this. We figure out efficiency in other ways. We did this with cars, right? When we talk about cars, we don't say what their miles per tank is, do we? We know how silly that is because we know they're all different size tanks and we'd all be driving Ford F-150s at 650 miles per tank. Now we all know tanks are different sizes, gasolines would drive cars, so instead of saying miles per tank, we say miles per gallon, and the numbers change. And we should all be driving BMW Asettas at 70 miles per gallon. Now I'm being cute with this as a reference, but I'm just trying to drive a point home about efficiency. Now, we do this for a $3 commodity. Shouldn't we be doing it for a $40,000 commodity? So when you get into the property, we're trying to find a way to bring data to the decision-making process and increase that ability to see the information. This is a really complex napkin sketch. As more data and evidence comes to the table, your ability to make better decisions comes into it. So if we can take the city and just kind of move the city aside and use GIS technology, now this should show up, but maybe not, it's washed out. But this is the streets and infrastructure. On the streets and infrastructure, the buildings are put on those, And then you can map the ologies, like hydrology and geology. So here's the hydrology, here's the geology. What we like to do is get in between those two and separate them, and then map the revenue, map the productivity of tax policy and other forms of policy to make it real and visual, so you can see what's going on. So to take Lafayette Parish, this is the entire parish the way that people typically look at it. So this is from non-taxable in gray, so you can see the airport out here, low value in dark green, to hot colors of high values. So you can see the mall right here is a purple spot. Well, that may be indeed true of the total property, but it's also a tremendous amount of acres. So how do I make it relative? So to go from total value map to a value per acre map, the map changes. Now let's just take a look at it in 3D. Can y'all tell me where downtown might be? You can kind of see the spike right here. Okay, there's downtown, and then here's River Ranch, right there. Actually clear on that thing. So we'll have a copy of all these as images, so you can load them in as well. It'll probably be more intense than this shot. So that's a three-dimensional distortion. We're map nerds. We like to make different kinds of maps. This is or Josh does. I don't even know how he does this. This is a cartogram. So it's a two-dimensional distortion to show potency and value. So this is a map of energy sales in the United States in 1921. New York's the #1 energy seller. Pennsylvania's #2. So you can see this is half the size of New York. So really quickly you can see graphic potency. So taking the whole parish and doing its cartogram, this is what happens. So you start to see the city, the center of the city, swell out into the parish. To put them side by side, here's the city area in here, and you can really start to see it swell up. But we highlighted the mall, River Ranch, and downtown right here to see how they're doing. So here's the mall area, here's its potency. So it's like a 1 to 9 potency. Go to River Ranch, it's about a 1 to 12 potency. You get into downtown, which is here, it's about a 1 to 16 potency. So the mall is potent, more potent than the things around it. River Ranch is more potent than the mall, and downtown is more potent than River Ranch. And again, this is about investigating the data and seeing how it works. So if you had a staff member in your office that took up 1 share, but they produced 16 times their level of productivity, how would you treat that individual? So the other thing that you can see when you see the city swell out, you're like, well, that's telling me something. This is the land area of the entire parish. This is the footprint of the city within the parish. It's like Pac-Man. It's about 15% of the land area. When you pull the revenue that the city produces from a property tax standpoint, it's actually producing 60% of the parish's property tax revenue. So it's about a 1 to 4 productivity level. That's quite handsome. That's a pretty good return. So getting through some examples of this, this is your Walmart at about $800,000 of value per acre. This is the Sam's Club at about $860,000 an acre. You get into the Best Buys a little bit under that at $853,000. This is the Target at about $1.2 million of value per acre. And remember, the Walmart, we'll keep that as a benchmark, it's about $800,000. You get into the mall. The mall's just above the Walmart at $800,000. But interesting, what you have happen inside the marketplace is you can only handle about 1 mall. So it affects other forms of retail. So you see the Northgate has dropped down to about $400,000 of value per acre. Ambassador Rose $730,000, but check this out. This is the Grand Marché shopping center. This is now down to about $200,000 of value per acre. So sometimes you have stuff that actually starts cratering when something else takes off. And that's something to be aware of. What can you afford to absorb in your community? And sometimes something good, you also have losses in the process too. Here's Petroleum Tower at $2 million an acre of value. It's a lovely rainbow of the whole thing. And then going into River Ranch is kind of fun to muck around here. This is a little dark, but this is something that looks like the Biltmore Estate. We're from Asheville, so Biltmore Estate's actually from there, so it's kind of fun to see this little knockoff mansion of it. But both of these are very large estate homes at $4 million an acre and $3 million an acre. As you go into River Ranch, this is kind of interesting. Here are these townhouses by the town center, 0.5 million of value per acre. You're gonna try to do that? Okay. So this is 4 million an acre, which you'd expect.
I did that.
This is 4 million. This is 5 million. And it's just, again, apples to apples. We're just looking at the potency on a per square foot, per acre, or whatever. So the way you can compare these things. This building here is 5.7 million an acre. So something that was in the middle of the neighborhood, it's not an estate home, is actually more potent. So you get into the town center, these are the things you'd expect. This is a whopping 14 million an acre. This is interesting. This is Main Street in River Ranch, and it's point about 2 million an acre. Now this has to account for more open space, more parking lots and stuff like that, which actually dilutes the value of that. This is a lot more dense. So when you get into the downtown, you start to see things that you'd expect. 4.8 million, let's say 5 million. Incidentally, that's about the potency of the townhouses in River Ranch. This one here, though, it starts to get impressive at 16 million. The reason why this is such a low level versus these three is it has massive surface parking lot behind it. So that dilutes that value through a larger surface area. This is the big one. $30 million of value per acre. This is the top of the spike in the model, the Chase building. Because not only does it have a large building, it also has a large building behind it, and its parking structure is tied to it. That's what you'd expect. Higher buildings, taller buildings, higher value. It's also interesting to find the anomalies in the system, but also the other things that are part of your heritage. What are the things that make Lafayette what you are? What are these buildings that are part of who you are and have this place-making ability of who you are? So, and I know I'm going to butcher this, was it Evangeline? Evangeline. The Evangeline Hotel, built in 1929, is pulling 4.6 million an acre. Now this is in the state that it's currently in, is an assisted living facility, an elder care home, an elder home. So even with that subsidy built into the system, it's still a producer. This is the New Gordon, or on the postcard it was called the New Gordon, now it's just called the Gordon. But this is $12 million of value per acre. This is something that's 100 years old. It was built in 1904, so it's actually 110 years old. So think of it at this level. This is something that's in your community's portfolio. As shareholders in this community of Lafayette Parish, this is a brother and sister of yours that's been here for 100 years. Your ancestors left you this building that everybody's proud enough to stick on a postcard. Well, that Walmart at $800,000 of value per acre, will that be here 100 years from now? The short answer is no. Can you put that on a postcard? Probably not. So these are value choices that happen inside policy. This isn't a Walmart fashion experience. What I'm trying to show you here is that they're following the path of least resistance inside your policies. It's not about the player, it's about how the game is set up. The cheaper the building, the lower the taxes you pay. It's that simple. So other buildings, this is the Sides building at about $6 million of value per acre. This is the Tipitinas, it's 7.7 million. So just to walk through some examples, the Lafayette Parish, somebody in single family out in the parish boundary outside the old city limits is paid about $500 in county tax or parish taxes per acre. The Northgate shopping center or shopping mall is about $2,000 of parish taxes per acre. This is a city single family residence. So somebody inside the old city boundary is producing about $2,600 of parish taxes, of the parish levy, and taxes per acre versus $500 of their brother and sister outside the city limits. Here's the Walmart at $3,000, the Arcadian Mall at $3,500, let's say. This is Main Street in River Ranch at $4,500. The average for downtown at $8,000 of parish taxes. Petroleum Tower at about $9,000. This is the mansion in River Ranch at $14,000. Incidentally, there the townhouse is at $21,000. The Evangeline, the Mid-South Tower, the Evangeline's at $21,000 a year in parish taxes per acre. This is the Gordon at $56,000 of parish taxes per acre. River Ranch Core, the Jefferson Tower, and at this end, the Chase Tower, producing about $132,000 a year in parish taxes, property taxes alone. This is the way your cash flow works. This is the revenue. So basically, if you had 1.8 acres of this stuff, it would equal to 4.2 acres of that stuff. So how you consume your property is critically important to the revenue stream that comes into it. Or another way of looking at it, just 2.3 acres of that would equal this 23 acre this. So the question that I would have for you all, is it really that hard to do 2.3 acres more of this in your downtown area? Can you make that a goal? Is that something that's feasible? Well, look at the return it gets you for 100 years. So we have other fun with the models. This is taking your model and laying it flat on the table and looking at it. And this is kind of a little washed out, but I'll make it clear. This is your economic heart monitor following the model. So you can see River Ranch peaks out at about 14 million an acre, and downtown's popping out at about 30 million an acre. This is the cash flow side, positive out of your revenue. Retail sales, we're still working on this. What y'all are seeing right now is kind of a midterm review. This is a three-dimensional model of your parish done by zip code. We're going to be drilling into this more. This is the zip code that downtown sits in. It's a little washed out. This is typically what we see. Here's downtown Austin up here. Here's the mall zone. So usually when we peel this, when we drill down even deeper, we usually see the downtown pop out. Here's again top of Syracuse's model. Here's its mall zone. And even in Nashville, we see the downtown pop out. So we're trying as much as possible. We're just going to be agnostic about the material and let the data drive the visuals, basically. So it's mostly just the computer runs the math on this stuff. So that's all the revenue side. Now, as you know, on the balance sheet, you have the cost side. So I've given you, this is where your productivity is. Now, what does it cost to service all of this stuff? Y'all have been through this before. I don't know, these are classic. This is your budget documents for your parish from 1994. I love this one. Have you ever seen these? Yeah, these are awesome. It's like, okay, we're in trouble. Our parish government is floundering. We've got these mandated services that can come and eat us. Somebody please help us. Okay, so if we weren't that serious in 94, here's 95, cover the budget document with lightning about to strike the Lafayette parish taxpayer. Please, we need some help here. So the following year they did consolidation, and everybody's okay now, right? So we solved the problem.
Fired that graphic designer.
Yeah, is that?
They fired that graphic designer.
Yeah, I know. We thought the same thing. It's like we had clearly an artist, and then this is clip art. So in the merger, they had to get rid of that artist. But what happened is you've found a new pot of money called the city. You've washed those funds into that pile, but you didn't change that behavior that got you into that sinkhole in the first place, right? So you're now experiencing those same problems. Chuck's talked about the roads you can't afford, right? So let's drill into it. The first thing we have to do is figure out how your money is spent. What's spent where? And there are certain things that are location specific, and there are certain things that aren't. So we have to get into the budget and figure out that how we choose our patterns of living has a direct correlation to cost. Some things do and some things don't. So on the side of things that do, where we move affects where the sewer lines go, what coulees need to be built, what bridges need to be built, where the buses go, right? That's geographically specific. What's not geographically specific are things like parks, your parish attorney, your CAO. D isn't just for one neighborhood. It's for everything. So we had to separate these two, and let's drill into the geographically specific stuff. Dealing with water is the #1 thing for living where you live. This is the location you're in. You've got to drain the water off your territory. You're flat as a pancake in territory. So you have things like coulees. Coulees need to be maintained. They're called grubbing. This is actually a lacrosse net in one of the coulees. We've found a car in another ditch. I mean, there's things that happen here, apparently. So we went out and visited a lot of your coulees. It's an impressive feat of nature to be able to deal with this stuff. So for us, we're mountain people, so we had to try to relate to flatland in a mountain way. So Josh McCarty made this map This is your parish boundary, and you can see the Vermilion River going through it. Here's downtown, that spot. So what he did is he exaggerated every inch of vertical that you have in your existing landscape. He inflated it to 500 inches. So we could look at you the way that we would look at ourselves. So you see a plateau here. So let's kind of turn it on the side. You really start to see a ridge that happens on the side of the river. So once you get off this shed, your ancestors settled on this plateau, and as you start to get off that, the more expensive it gets to drain. You still have to get the water off the top of the table, but getting it out of a low-lying area is expensive. So this is, we just had some fun with this model just to let you see how we think about three-dimensional environments. So looking back at the parish, the Vermilion Rivers, that's it. That's your life source. So this is a tidal river that has to take that water off the area. There's more drainage that goes to a following river over here, but the majority of your parish goes there. So laying the topo on it, you can clearly see the ridge and what the original settlement is. So we distorted the model. Basically, if you pour a glass of water right here on this line, half of it goes into this drainage basin, and half of that glass goes into that drainage basin, and you can clearly see where the coulee flushes it out of the system. So you have these zones. These zones are not all created equal. These zones down here are much more expensive to drain than that zone, even though it's larger. Because this is telling you you've got to do more work in a smaller confined area, so you need more infrastructure to pump the water out. So what we were doing with the model is programming that cost into it. Where you choose to live, you should be footing that bill for the expense of draining your territory, is a simple way of looking at it. So there's the ridge up here. Pavement's also locationally specific. If you choose to live further out, there's more roadway that has to maintain you. You have a tremendous amount of pavement in your environment. So to make a point about this, government services have made shifts this way before about cost of service and delivery. So this is, we use the post office as an example. Back in the day, I could build, as a developer, I could build that neighborhood. The post office, postman or post person would come to my neighborhood and then make the delivery to all these houses, right? That's the way that it used to be done. Nowadays, the postal officer comes here, and then that's it. This neighborhood has a gang box of mailboxes, and we all have to make that move. Now, why did the post office do this? Well, the fact of the matter is they can't control the price of the stamps. So the stamps are 50 cents a pop in this neighborhood versus this neighborhood. The stops, however, this one has to make 31, this one makes 1. This one has to deal with 5,000 feet of service delivery, while this one has 0. So they accounted for that cost that they were bearing into the system, and they said, we can't afford that anymore. Now the problem is yours. You want to live in a scattered environment? You deal with it, not us. We'll deliver to a box. So let's think about your streets. You've got this network of roads that's your system. We pulled out the roads that you don't pay for, the federal roads, and to some extent the state roads, and you have this intersection point of how you use these roads. You all drive through intersections and get around. So how many of those intersections you travel through can be measured, and they're also weighted. So the more intersections you go through, the more streets you. So you can clearly see Johnston popping up as a really dark vein. So a lot more of the network is using that. However, out here, there's only a few people using it. So the cost of these segments should be transferred to those individuals, though they should still pick up a large pile of the network because they use more of the network to get around. So the model starts to look something like this. The broader red roads are more people's share hold because more people use them because of trips, while the end of the stubs are generally locational neighborhood roads, right? So zooming in, you can start to see some of this, that like these little stubs in here that are a dead end should be for those people. So you can back charge at least that section to this area, and then these individuals should pick up a system of the road, and we can measure that based on where the jobs are versus residential. So people have to get to work, so they have to use the network, and we can charge through it. There are other things in the system, dead ends and specifically, I call it the public driveways. Y'all can go out and drive on them if you want, but do you drive on them every day? I mean, this one's used so much that this person actually parked their Winnebago on it, Winnebago trailer. So They're stubs on the system, but they're public roads. So we all have to pay for them, or you all, but they're not in the network. They literally are stubbed off. So you have all of them, there's lots of them. There's a no outlet sign here, no outlet sign there. This is one example, this section right here, that we'll explore a little bit deeper. So you can see a cul-de-sac here and a cul-de-sac here. So in driving around, you see these buses all over the place trying to negotiate this territory. This bus right here is in a cul-de-sac making a 3-point turn to turn around. Y'all are paying for that. These are your taxes, paying for these buses to drive around in the disconnected network. So that bus drives down here, comes out, goes all the way around here, comes back down, and then pops back in this cul-de-sac. And at the end of the day, they're only 66 feet apart. So you've just added a service delivery of 1.5 miles to a bus when you could have solved that with a 66-foot disconnect. Now this is a political discussion to talk about. These folks want their cul-de-sac, these folks want their cul-de-sac. Great, keep it. But you own all the road on top of that because none of us can use it. It's a driveway. I mean, this is, again, a conversation to have. Everyone's picking up that fee. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because the amount of roads that you have. You have about 5.6 square miles? Yeah. 5.6 square miles of road surface. The city has the majority of street network in it. The parish has what's left. So when you look at the area of roads, 2/3 of the area of roads are in the city's area, 1/3 is in the parish. But when you look at who's paying the foot in the bill for the street infrastructure, you're looking at 7% being paid by folks out in the parish for their 1/3 of the infrastructure. So that means the remaining bill is a transfer payment coming out of the city to cover the parish costs. Just something that's the DAC. So this is kind of blocked out, but this is taking, Josh made this great image. This is the taking your 5 square miles of roads and turning them into a spaceship and hovering them over Manhattan. Or better yet, here's the French Quarter. So y'all have to pay for that. You have to maintain that spaceship of roads right there. It's a lot of real estate. This is it out next to Venice. We have fun with these things. There's also infrastructure costs. So we've gone through road costs, cooling costs, now let's talk about the pipes. You have a lot of pipes. You can see here, we have this is for the sewage system. These are your treatment facilities. There's little red factories along here. All the pipes have to connect from your houses to those plants. For those that are in the lower lying areas, you can start to see these lift stations where they have to pump everything up to get to the sewage plant. So those are more maintenance costs that you have in your system. And they generally follow the paths of the lower lying areas. Just to kind of zoom in here and let's just compare a couple. This is zooming into, you flush your toilet right here. I flush my toilet. I have a gravity feed. We both have to get to treatment plant. You have 3,500 feet of pipe and a lift station, while I have 900 feet of pipe and I'm using gravity. Two totally different costs in the system that need to be accounted for. And again, this needs to be on the table and discussed. When you drill into these pipes, however, this is what's kind of interesting. You've been building new PVC pipes out here, plastic pipes which have a longer useful life. And inside the city, you've been moving past 55% of your sewage pipes are still in clay. This is tremendously expensive. You need to upgrade that. This is the area where you're having a lot of your positive return. And that area, the same area, is not seeing that same reinvestment in the infrastructure underground. So this is something to pay attention to. Those pipes are going to fail sooner or later. Clay pipe only lasts so long. So a maintenance plan needs to be scheduled for this rather than stretching out the system without fixing the existing system. That needs to be maintained, much like the roads. So just for fun, going back to the cartogram and doing so we've got the revenue potency. Let's go ahead and add the costs on it. You see that in the area where you're getting the biggest revenue, you're also seeing the lightest colors. So the higher intensity costs are around the edges, where you also have the lowest return. So let's kind of net this out. How do you put the costs and collide it with the revenues and see how this pans out? So back to the revenues again, you see downtown, this is the property taxes per acre. This is the total property taxes. Now you see the mall jump up, which is mall's a big producer. But there's under all that surface, you have all of these costs, right? So here's the revenues, and then here are the costs. When you start to mash them together, they look like this. Or another way of looking at it in 3D is this way. So you see this ring of costs. This is, in red is what's still net negative. In black, or in the black, is creatively colored and titled. In the black is where you're net positive. Does that make sense? So let's kind of do it a different way. This is taking the model, and what Josh did is he put it all above the table. So if you're net positive, you're the green stuff in the center. If you're net negative, you see the ring of red around you. You're all tied together. You're a joint consolidated government. So these are the costs that we're talking about. This is the model that Chuck brought in earlier. But when you net it all out, what do we all have to pay in the system to really make this thing work financially? So really, when you start thinking about it, the solution is in the patterns that you have around you. If you think about that, let's go back to Tipitina's again. 2.3 acres equals 23 acres of that. Well, that was just the revenue side. When we look at the cost of both of these, you really start to catch up where it only takes 0.2 acres of that to equal the 23 acre this. So the question I have before you all is, can you accomplish at least an acre of that? If you can pull off an acre of that, you can see the potency. It'll be about 5 Walmarts worth of potency. This is a way to harvest new wealth in your community with existing typologies that produce a great amount of revenue potential. So there's things inside the system to just be careful of and know about. There are policies that affect all of this stuff that steer the behavior of me as an investor in your community. So I'll give you a classic example. This is in Cheyenne, Wyoming. This is one of my favorite examples. You've got dirt that's valued, and your assessor also values the improvements on the dirt or the buildings on the dirt, right? So we can go into the computer and just turn the buildings off. And so you have low value to high value, and you expect the world to look like this. Everybody's got the same value of the dirt in the neighborhood. You and all your neighbors are the same value. When I was presenting this, I was like, what's going on here? Where this is $18,000 an acre, and crossing the street it jumps up to $34,000 an acre. How can crossing the street in the same zoning category double the land value? And the tax assessor was sitting in the front row, and she raises her hand. And she's like, you don't understand. I said, okay, try me. What am I missing? And she said, well, the more land you have, the lower the value. There's more land here. Let that wash over you. I was like, okay, so I've got 3/4 of a mile of street here, 3/4 of a mile of street here, another half mile and half mile. I've got 3 miles of street around this property. They've got 200 feet. This property has the most capacity. More capacity means more trips. More trips means more car accidents, more fire calls, more commerce, more theft, more police calls. I get more of your stuff, and you're going to charge me less for it? She's like, yeah, that's our standard. We don't take costs into consideration. That's a policy question. I asked her, why don't you change the policy? She goes, well, that's our standard. And I asked her, I said, so where'd you get the standard from? Did Moses deliver it to you? I mean, can you not change it? When we look at your system, it's not as bad as Cheyenne, but we see, this is Johnston. You can see Johnston. You can see the red vein here of Johnston clearly, but that's because your commercial property is taxed higher in dirt value than the residential properties around it. So you see these residential pads here and here. This is the commercial area. But even within that, you can start to see some bumps happening in other areas, even within the zone. So there are some things that we're going to talk with your tax assessor about and try to be more educated about what can change, what state policies are things that are just local policies that you can do to tweak. But there's all of these things in the system to be aware of. So just realize, in closing, these aren't invisible market forces that are making me develop a certain way in your community. Sometimes they're policies, and sometimes you can hurt yourself with them. But there are things that drive the market to make decisions that financially, from a community standpoint, may put you upside down. So this is critically important to use as a tool to figure out whether or not this is sustainable. Based on our opening presentation, this clearly is not a sustainable model unless there are 4 ways to deal with this. You can continue, kick this can down the road, and perpetuate the problems that you've learned about since the 90s. And you'll still have these problems, and you'll walk your way straight into the more deep hole. You have to figure out what you can work with. You can raise your taxes, you can cut services, or you can start to deal with your development patterns differently. So realize that your community, if you're to take the parish and look at its tax value, it's worth $16 billion. That's your taxable value of all your real estate right now. Put it in perspective, the Saints are $1 billion, the Pelicans are about $340 million. You could essentially liquidate your parish and buy 16.1 Saints if you wanted to, you know? And so you think of, Mr. Benson, don't you think he knows Drew Brees' towel bill? Of course. Not only knows his towel bill, he knows how many touchdowns he's thrown, he knows all the data about this stuff. This is a business that has to operate financially. And when a player isn't working out, or they want to have a younger player, they make a tough business decision because they want to try to get to the Super Bowl, right? So we do this with other corporations. So that's all we're trying to leave here in the model, is to give you some measurables, to look at all of this stuff, to re-envision yourself in a way that's agnostic and totally about the data. And this is a decision you all are going to have to make. We're thinking about, who am I to be here to do this? Ultimately, I know that there's politics that your community has. There's politics in every community. We're going to use a Louisiana quote from Russell Long. Incidentally, it's a colonial barb about taxation. Don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax the fellow behind the tree. We're ironically a country created on a tax revolt, yet we're not clear about the literacy of our own taxation to see what's going on around us, right? But these are conversations you all need to have. You're going through them with your consolidated plan. Ultimately, I like to say, there's this great Polish proverb, this is not my circus and these are not my monkeys. This is your community. I've got my own circus and monkeys back in Asheville, where I live, and these are political discussions that we have as well. So with that, I'm going to close. You need to do the math on this, and I'm going to turn it over to Chuck for a closing statement.
I just want to give you a little bit of national context, because some of this stuff is a little scary. Some of the stuff will keep you up at night. It keeps me up at night. When we look at this city does not, there's a lot of remarkable things about this place. There's a lot of people here I really like. There's a lot of things that are unique to this place. But in terms of the stuff we look at, the data, the land use pattern, the developments, the decisions the city's made on where to build roads, where to extend sewer and water, you guys are very ordinary. You're very much like everybody else. Every city in the country has done the exact same stuff that you have here. There's nothing like remarkable about it. And I say that because we are having a dialogue at many levels of government right now about what's going on with our cities. Because our cities have experienced decades and decades of growth and robust growth, and we still don't have the money to do basic things. Why is that? It's not because our cities are incompetent. It's not because they're run by people who don't know what they're doing. It's not because public employees are lazy or overpaid. It's not because our public officials are corrupt. It's not because they're being exploited by corporations, or you can go through the litany of things that people throw out. It's because we have an experimental development model. We have this way of building that only we have done. And it doesn't work. It gives us an illusion of wealth today in exchange for this long-term set of liabilities that now have come due. I'm gonna throw out the name of a place, not because I want it in the paper or because I want to startle you, but because I want to jolt your thinking about this conversation. The place I'm going to throw out is Detroit. Everybody today has a narrative to explain what's gone on in Detroit. And you can pick anybody out, and if they hate corporations, they can blame corporations. If they hate government, they can blame government. If they hate, whatever it is that you can explain Detroit. But I want to give you my explanation of Detroit. If you go back to Detroit in the early 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, they adopted and pioneered what became the American development model. They did it more quickly, they did it more aggressively than anybody else. They were the first ones to run the highways through the middle of the city. They were the first ones to rip down all the buildings. They were the first ones to build the auto-oriented, aggressive suburbs, mile after mile after mile. They were the first ones to do it. And they faced, 20 years ago, the questions that we're facing here today and that other cities are facing now too. We have all this stuff. We don't have enough money to maintain it all. What do we do? What do we do? There's no easy answer to that. And you can see how human beings in Detroit have struggled to answer that question. Because what's our natural inclination as human beings? It's to hang on to what we've got, right? We do everything we can, whether we can influence the government or, tax the person behind the tree or, whatever it is we got to do to hang on to what we have. But there's an axiom that we've started to use, what can't be maintained won't be maintained. If we don't have the money to fix all those roads, we won't fix them all. And when you start to think that through, you realize that that's the same thing that the people in Detroit went through. We put off maintenance a little bit. We, we lay off some firefighters and some police officers. We have to decide between fixing that block and that block has some wealthy people who show up at the meeting and that block doesn't, so guess which one gets fixed? And you see, through human nature, you see this long, slow decline. What I'm committed to doing as our organization and what I'd like to leave to impart with all of you is that we have to have this dialogue across this community. These are not easy questions. These are not going to be easy answers. But if we allow ourselves to simply go on building more stuff, growing in the same pattern, robbing Peter to pay Paul, putting off maintenance, cutting back on services, we are going to be stuck in that long, slow decline as well. And this place will not achieve what it should, what it can, and really what it needs to. The exciting thing about Lafayette right now is that you are leaders in asking really tough questions about your place. This conversation could not happen in most communities. Most communities would not say, look, we're short on money, we seem to have these structural problems, let's invest some time and effort and money in figuring out why. Nobody else is doing that. So you guys are asking the hard questions first. That makes you pioneers. Sometimes the pioneers get scalped, right? I want to close by letting you know that I really honor and respect the fact that you're asking these difficult questions now. And I urge you as leaders in what was called the choir when we started out to not only talk to each other about this, but to talk to your neighbors, to talk to others, and to start having this dialogue seep into the broader conversation in the community. At the end of the day, we got here because of a national consensus on what we should do to have growth and development and prosperity. We're only going to change this by having a different local consensus on what success means. And that can't come about with just the people in the room. Even if we had all the council members and all the staff on board, it will only come about if we have a general public consensus on what that should be. So with that, let's stop. If you have a question for myself or for Joe, or if you have a technical question, we got Mr. GIS accountant, what is it called? Geographic accountant? Geo accountant. Here, and we'd be happy to talk about any of this stuff. Go ahead.
I have a question for Joe. Some of the buildings that you use as examples that have a really high value per acre, like the Tipitina's building, you're not accounting for, or maybe I'm missing it, but parking. These buildings, Gordon Square and Tipitina's, either use a lot of public facilities for parking or use other surface lots that are probably valueless. So how do you account for that? If I want to do an acre over Tipitina's building, what do I do with my other acre when I park?
Yeah, there's Asheville, my longer presentation has this revitalization of Asheville story to it. And I've gotten that question about our building, the 6-story building, so I'll talk about that because I'm familiar with that in the area. The city, our town was kind of had a really interesting history in the fact that we were the 2nd largest city in North Carolina at the turn of the Depression. And then we tanked probably the deepest of any city in North Carolina. We had the 2nd highest debt per capita of the entire United States when the Depression hit. So we chose to pay off that debt in this very weird decision in the 30s. It took us until 1976. But because of that, we had a poor bond rating. We had debt on the books. So we never tore all the buildings down. So when you all come to Asheville now, you see this incredibly intact 1920s downtown. But it's because of our own poverty we couldn't tear those down. So in the 90s, when the city started trying to put itself on a path of revitalization, they chose parking structures as their leader to draw in investors. So we'll go in, rather than have a law that says you need to tear that building down in order to make your parking, because that's the way you'll solve it. And then on top of it, look what happens. If I've got 2 buildings side by side, both paying the same taxes, and I eliminate a building, this is where my tax rate now is.
Right.
Because I've got no improvement on the land. So in a way, you're shooting yourself in the foot by having that policy on the books, because that's what I'm going to take advantage of, and I'll just sell that parking to other people and actually make more money than our taxes. So our city actually chose to do parking structures as a form of stock commodity to make those buildings revitalized. So yes, the Tipitinas today may have a surface parking lot, but that may be part of an overall parking strategy that you all could work on to start to consolidate development. There may be developers like us, we choose to put no parking in our buildings. You know, that you may have those individuals come to town. You probably will have those people coming to town. That world of development operation, there are developers that are now not seeing that as a risky investment anymore. And a lot of that has to do with the millennials. But
The kind of holy grail of development, in terms of going from where you're at today to like the next level, is to have a lot more residential within the downtown or within walking distance.
Right. But when you factor in the cost to the taxpayers or to the government to build those parking structures, how does that change your numbers?
it depends. Like in the case of our parking building, we all pay parking fees. So we buy a little parking pass. All of our people who live in our building buy a little parking pass. And when those people leave to go to their work or go out hiking or whatever people do, the city then sells that space again. Our parking structures have been paid off ahead of their bonds.
Okay.
So in our case at work, because of the critical density around them, in the case of if Tipitina's owned that surface parking lot behind it, we grab that with the building. But if they're just buying monthly passes, we don't see that in our data. But it's a great question, and it's true. You have to have that in there. But ultimately, the solution goes what Chuck's talked about, but also that goes back to Jane Jacobs. It's about making residential places in your downtown environment. Why aren't there more townhouses like the River Ranch ones within a walking environment of downtown? It seems like a no-brainer. Those are things to think about.
If you want to see what that looks like in the analysis, how I treat that, I can chat with you.
So we know there's ways to like incentivize density, and also there's ways to support public transit so that people can get around and we can have less wear and tear on the infrastructure. But have you ever seen innovative models of how people like look at labor sheds or commute sheds to inform policies about incentivizing people to live in, work closer together, or is it all really market-based?
That's really interesting. I have seen some of that work. I think though the first part of your kind of the premise of your question, I would almost like gently push back on, in the sense that the option to create incentives for density or create incentives for transit. Those are interesting suppositions. To me, I think the easier one off the bat is to stop subsidizing the stuff that is bleeding red on that screen. And that's sometimes direct subsidies that the city does. But even more than that, it's the indirect subsidy. It's the fact that we will agree to take over the long-term maintenance of subdivisions that we know we lose horrible amounts of money on. Or we will build massive transportation infrastructure systems that allow that type of development, that facilitate that style of development. So in a sense, there isn't a market for housing here. There isn't a market for land. There isn't a market for development. There's a subsidized approach, and then there's a less subsidized or non-subsidized approach. And so before you subsidize the other one to try to counterbalance the other subsidy you do, just do no harm. Like, stop subsidizing all of it. And I think that a lot of those things will take care of themselves. I have seen, though, where the jobs housing balance, and I think it's important to understand that the economic ecosystem that is a byproduct of all the incentives that you have in place itself also becomes very auto-oriented. If you work at Walmart, and I hate to pick on Walmart, if you work at a national chain out on the edge of the community, you're likely driving there, carpooling there, or maybe taking transit to a low-density destination that is not going to have a lot of ridership, highly subsidized transit. All of those things come about because of the way we've subsidized that land use pattern. As that starts to go away, and we see this in communities around the country, and actually, I think you see it more frequently with like local ag type products. All of a sudden, other replacements in the market become more viable. So, if my choice is I can go up the block and pay $4 for a gallon of milk, or I can get in my car or get on the low frequency transit and go 5 miles and get a gallon of milk for $3.50. I may go the 5 miles and save myself 50 cents. Because I don't want to pay that difference. But if the traffic getting out there is a little bit more congested, if the route isn't subsidized, in other words, if the market is not so tilted in that favor, well then walking up the street to get my milk, maybe paying that little bit extra makes a lot of sense. These are the economic decisions that are complex, interrelated, and difficult to predict and project, but they're the ones that start to creep in when we essentially stop subsidizing the competitive approach. The other thing that goes on with that, and your new development code is actually going to help you with this. Your old development code, and most development codes around the country, essentially the base assumption of them is that the landscape is frozen as it is today. And the only thing new that will be built will either be a greenfield development or an heroic effort in a dying place. And the reality is successful cities have small bits of incremental growth across broad areas, ongoing continuously. And so even in successful neighborhoods, you have buildings that are maybe less successful that are being renovated to become the next leader. And then after time, this one will become more and more. And so what we have to do is essentially get out of the way and allow the market to respond to the fact that I would like to walk 3 blocks to get my milk, but no one will let me build a corner grocer here. Or no one will let a corner grocer come in because it's against your code. So my only choice is to drive the 5 miles out to the edge. If we allow that other option, what you allow then is the market to respond when the subsidies go away from the other. And that's a really critical part of the overall strategy.
Got a couple answers to that, and just be iterative about it, try things. It's okay to have policies fail, just to try something different, and not get wedded into I put Moses up there for a reason, that sometimes we accept these policies like they were delivered from God, and they're human beings like us that put these policies in place and the market's responded. it doesn't mean they're trapped in time. The other thing is look at Center for Neighborhood Technology. Scott Bernstein has done a lot of work on location-efficient mortgages, getting the mortgage industry to accept the fact that people that can walk to work should be able to afford a better mortgage. It's been that's a work at a national scale that's going on out there. Our hospital does that. There's things you can do to negotiate individually. The hospital in my town is the second largest single employer, so that's something they took on to offer their employees some. I don't know if I can't remember if it's a second on the mortgage or something they'll do in assistance because they know their employees are within a walk shed or a bike shed, which makes them more healthy. That was their motivation. Cool. We're around all day tomorrow.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out.
And I just want to close it up. Obviously, thank you guys for coming. We kind of had to scramble the last week or so with the UDC, so we probably could have spent more time on PR, but that's fine because you're the choir, and this is kind of the rough draft. But I just want to close by saying, you know, when I took the job at Public Works, I had sort of intellectually understood some of these concepts, but I'm now the guy that gets the requests from neighbors and councilmen. You know, you need to come look at my road, you need to come look at this road. You know, I want an estimate for XYZ road on how we're going to fix it, and in the current year's budget I have $300,000 to handle all road maintenance for the entire unincorporated part of the parish. That doesn't overlay a full road. That's like half a road. And so when you see the sort of the disparity on, you know, where our expenses are and where our revenue producing properties are, it's good to be able to see this visually and sort of, you know, understand sort of the situation that we're in now. You know, I think that's not a bad thing actually, that we're at a spot in our community's growth where we're going to be forced to deal with this sooner rather than later, because it is upon us, and so this tool, I'm hopeful and excited, and I know Joey is too, that this is going to be a way where we can finally have that discussion as a parish, and we can talk about the facts, not about our feelings, not about our philosophies, not about anything else other than this is what it costs, this is how much we're bringing in, so what are we going to do about it? So, thanks y'all. Thanks for coming.
The preceding program was made possible in part with production assistance provided by AOC Community Media.